Thank you, Eric. I just got a notification that my internet is stable, so just please flag if you cannot hear me. So good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I am Dang Espita Casanova from Cleaner Asia, and I would be presenting today on assessing co-benefits and identifying solutions for a particular city in the Philippines. So a key step in integrating air pollution and climate change, and of course the planning and implementation of programs for improved air quality and mitigating climate change impacts is of course the use of decision-making tools to determine what kinds of measures are best suited in bringing reduced emissions from multiple pollutants that would lead to the co-benefits that we desire for our cities. And my presentation aims for us to understand the use of a tool called emissions inventory in baselining emissions in a particular city or jurisdiction, and identifying, of course, the priority emission sources that need to be addressed, considering different factors such as resources and, of course, priority policy frameworks of the government. We'd also know more about an example of a co-benefits tool and how this has been applied in an Asian city, particularly in the Philippines. So the selection of tools for integrated climate and air quality action planning depends on several factors. And of course, this include the needs of the city, mainly defined by which target emission sources are being prioritized. And of course, what are the interventions that are practical and timely in addressing the needs of the city. And as well as it also considers the benefits that decision makers and policymakers want to quantify or estimate for those specific interventions or projects. So for example, in this list, which is definitely not exhaustive, the first two items, transport emissions evaluation model for projects, let me just point here, and the international vehicle emissions tool are both specifically designed to estimate estimate benefits for transport sector interventions in terms of reduction in air pollution emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, time savings, fuel savings, and accident reduction. So I'll talk a bit more about TIMP later. And for example, other tools such as PenMap, which was developed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This is a bit more general in terms of quantifying health impacts and economic value of air pollution levels in a particular city, as well as the benefits that come with changes, particularly improvements in air quality. And of course, tools mostly are open sourced, of course, to promote the public use and ownership of the tools. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've provided two links here in purple text where you can access some consolidated information on available tools for co-benefits quantification. So in my next slides, I will briefly discuss or describe the work that we've done for a particular city in the Philippines, Santa Rosa City in southern Luzon in the Philippines. So Santa Rosa is one of our long-term partners in terms of air quality management and transport projects. Santa Rosa has been a pilot city of Cleaner Asia's Cities for Cleaner Partnership, as well as currently a member of the Breathe Life Network of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, WHO, World Bank, and of course, UNEP. So Cleaner Asia's initiatives for Santa Rosa is being supported and jointly implemented by various international organizations. And of course, the conduct of the emissions inventory, which I will describe later, is just the first step in the development of the city's integrated climate and clean air action plan. So just a brief recap of what an emissions inventory is. So an emissions inventory is a comprehensive listing by source of air pollutants, short-lived climate pollutants, and greenhouse gas emissions in a geographic area within a specified time period. So in an emissions inventory, so emissions are estimated or quantified by multiplying an emission factor by activity data. So where we usually get emission factors is from like a widely available database of emissions factor developed by different organizations and academic and research institutions worldwide. And it also may come from direct like on the ground or local research using measurements of emissions. And the activity data is mostly directly related with the fuel consumption of these emission sources. So the approach that we took in Santa Rosa is we have partnered with the city's Environment and Natural Resources Office, which mobilized a core team called the Clean Air Core Team, who has been very instrumental in the different phases of the project. So what's special about this core team is that it was institutionalized by an executive order of the city mayor, and hence that ensures that emission inventory development, updating, and later on, of course, its application for the prioritization of measures in clean air and climate action planning is sustained. So mostly the challenge that we encounter in action planning, emission inventory development, and other components of air quality management in cities is that everything stops after a particular project. So by institutionalizing a technical working group or a working group that really is involved in the different phases of the project ensures that ensures continuity and sustainability of the effort. So the project was co-financed by the city itself and with other partners such as the Mitsubishi Motors Philippines Corporation, one of the city's private partners. So it ran for about 1.5 years, like going from the development of the emissions inventory up to the completion of the climate and cleaner action plan for the city. So Santa Rosa's emission inventory included criteria air pollutants, PM 2.5, PM10, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and also non-methane volatile organic carbons, and also greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutants. And what this does is that it ensures a firm foundation of integrated climate and air quality action planning for the city. So the EI or the emissions inventory also covered point sources for the industries, area sources comprised of commercial establishments and households and agricultural activities, as well as the mobile sources dominant in the city. So the process involved 3 phases, and as I've said earlier, the Clean Air Core team has been very much involved in these stages, and these were all accompanied by internal capacity building of the personnel comprising the Clean Air Core team to ensure sustainability of activities. So just to briefly discuss the results of the study. So we found out that PM10 is mainly produced by mobile sources, specifically motorcycles and tricycles. And in addition, pollutants such as black carbon, carbon monoxide, NMVOCs, and oxides of nitrogen were also attributed to mobile sources. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide emissions were mainly caused by industries from the use of coal and LPG as well as fuel. PM 2.5 come from both point and mobile sources, and methane emissions jointly result from mobile sources and area source activities. So what we also have here are graphs which particularly point to or illustrate specific pollutant emissions, such as for black carbon. We can see here that for black carbon, mobile sources comprise up to almost 70% of the emissions, while carbon dioxide emissions from point or industries comprise a little more than 60% of the emissions. For mobile sources, if you could see here, looking specifically at black carbon coming from transport, we can see that jeepneys are a dominant source, followed by cars, trucks, and light goods vehicles. And these findings corroborate with other studies conducted for example, for cities like Manila and Quezon City that specifically looked at emissions from road vehicle activity. Now, even though, as I have described earlier, that we deployed an extensive core team to do the emissions inventory data collection, it is very important that to take account, of course, of the challenges in terms and the gaps in terms of the data that we were able to compile for this emissions inventory, especially for sources that are beyond the mandate or responsibility of the city, such as for inter-province or intercity vehicles, and also large point or industries. So these are not the city technically does not have direct control of these sources. So what we also were able to do is that we identified specific areas, or what we call barangays, within Santa Rosa, which need immediate or urgent action owing to their elevated levels of emissions. So the results of the EI, or the emissions inventory, were used as the basis for the prioritization of measures for the city's climate and cleaner action plan. And because of the very evident dominance of transport emissions, the measures that were prioritized in the plan were for transportation, specifically in improving inspection and maintenance through vehicle testing and apprehension program, and improving public transportation, as well as promoting walking and biking as modes of transportation. Now, while the process of emissions inventory development and the prioritization of measures zoomed into like a one specific sector, it's very important to note that a holistic and strategic air quality management and climate mitigation approach is very important. And so other measures, such as that of building capacity of personnel and institutions, as well as, of course, looking at emerging sources of pollution within the city, should be taken into account. So in the process, we were also able to pinpoint which institutional processes could be improved, such as the integration of, for example, the collection of EI-related or air quality management-related data in the processes of the city, such as for business permit approvals or applications, and also community-based surveys. So in that way, we are sure that there is a continuous inflow of updated data that can be used to identify the measures that we need for reducing emissions. So from the results of the EI, or the emissions inventory, we were able to come up with an analysis of the co-benefits of the specific transport measures that were prioritized in the climate and cleaner action plan of the city. And here we use the TIMP, or the Transport Emissions Evaluation Model, which is a tool that was developed by Cleaner Asia with ITDP, ADB, Cambridge Systematics, and UNEP back in 2010, I think. So that the tools were initially developed to evaluate emissions impacts of ADB's transport projects, but then later on expanded to evaluate the ex-ante emissions or ex-ante impacts of various transport measures at the project level. So what we did was, with our partners from IGES, we modeled benefits and impacts of the measures in terms of course, emissions for specific pollutants, carbon dioxide, PM and NOx, as well as other parameters. So the key steps had been first in developing the baseline 2020 and 2030 emission scenarios, wherein we were able to come up with several assumptions, of course, owing to the availability of data during the time of the study. So we had made assumptions on the composition of the vehicle fleets, average distance of trips, emission factors, population changes, etc. And then we proceeded to developing the intervention scenarios, namely improving the inspection and maintenance program and promoting non-motorized transport through the creation of bike lanes. Now, presenting the results, it was evident that the reduction in carbon dioxide in the different scenarios compared to the baseline is approximately 25% reduction, or equivalent to 40,000 tons of carbon dioxide. For PM10, it was noted that the emissions of PM10 modeled for future scenarios were way below the 2020 levels. And for NOx, the amount of NOx that was approximated is 10% lower than that of the baseline. And it was noted that to be able to also illustrate the aggregated estimated emission reduction, a combined scenario was also assumed, where the reductions for the pollutants were seen to also be significant. So from this application, it was found that carbon dioxide emissions will continue to grow. Even with the proposed interventions, and so with this, I think it was very timely for the city to look into more ambitious more ambitious steps, and combined with other of course programs, to make sure that we are holistically addressing the emission sources. And the results of course suggest the importance of promoting not only a specific type of intervention, but also considering a whole suite of interventions to holistically to drastically address the rising emissions in the city. And that is my last slide. Actually, this is just like a snapshot of the areas for improvement. But if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them via chat or later if there would be time. Thank you.